Okay, hold on. I got to do my got it. Okay. Hey, everybody. It's Irene here from Keller Williams Portfolio. Thank you for joining us. It's 1:30. So, Tony, I'm going to introduce you and leave you the floor. I imagine we'll have some people jumping on after we're done. But I wanted to thank you for joining us. We really appreciated your session last summer, and I imagine there's been just one or two changes in the whole Laneway house arena since then, huh?
There's been a few.
Yeah.
Always changing, seems like every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to give you the floor so you can take over.
Sure. Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, hopefully there's a few others that end up joining us, but I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm doing that, it's not just me from Lanescape. Craig Race, our co-founder and principal architect, is here as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Hi, everybody.
Sorry, Craig, no snub intended.
How dare you?
Thanks for being here with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us again.
And yeah, so I mean, we'll sort of run through our sort of typical presentation, and we'll of course sort of stick around for some questions.
Okay.
My role at Lanescape is to oversee the day-to-day. I mean, we have, I want to say, about 15 projects complete, another couple dozen in construction, and then quite a few in the works as well. So we like to think we're pretty good at this point. And then without speaking for Craig, Craig was actually instrumental in actually developing these bylaws in the first place. So you can give Craig all that credit.
Fantastic.
So shall we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Cool. Go ahead.
Sure. So we sort of run through probably a similar outline to what you saw last year, although with lots of updates. We'll start with kind of the macro about why Laneway suites are a thing, which we'll go light on since we've already talked about that. Then Tony will take you through the bylaws themselves so you can start to see how the Laneway suite policy is actually looking on properties. And then extend that further by going through some of our projects we have under construction and talking about the typical case studies we see. So when you're speaking to your clients and to buyers, you can sort of understand when a Laneway suite is appropriate and what type of Laneway suite is ideal. So to sort of talk about the macro, like Laneway suites have actually existed in Toronto for over a century. There are a lot of historic structures that got absorbed into our urban fabric that were industrial and agrarian structures, like you'll see on the next slide here. These tended to predate the automobile. They were barns or industries that were just part of urban life before we had segregated zoning policies, and we actually needed things like horses and cows within our neighborhoods to sustain our communities. And once we started seeing those uses leave our neighborhoods, people still had these buildings kicking around, and they've been converting them into houses ever since. That led to the typology originating as something that was more of a renovation of an existing typology. But in sort of the late end of the 1900s and prior to the as of right policy being passed in 2018, I'm sure you've all seen like the sexy architecture photography of new build homes that were constructed on parcels of land that were on laneways. These tended to be really exceptional works of architecture, but they required someone with a really unique property and a lot of money and knowledge to get through the OMB and other kinds of opaque planning processes. And that kind of difficulty to get laneway houses approved meant that usually you would only do it if you were going to try to get a 3-story house, something that was fairly large and generally out of context with laneways. So those have kind of gone the way of the dinosaur. And what we have now is an as of right policy that is not as big as these laneway houses. Laneway suites are a lot more sensitively scaled, but they are as of right. And there are a lot of advantages to them. So we'll get into them in a minute. But when we look at the city of Toronto, sort of where these houses live in our city, when you look at our zoning map, it's pretty interesting. to see how they're sort of battling our unequal growth patterns that we've been experiencing. So if we look at the census tracts in Toronto, which is on the next slide here, for where our population is growing, you'll see that all the highlighted tracts here are where we have population increases. Those tend to be centered around areas where we have mid-rise and high-rise zoning policies. Kind of makes sense. We have about 20,000 people a year moving to the city of Toronto, at least we did before COVID. So it makes sense that they would all move into high-rise towers and mid-rise homes where we're adding the majority of new density to the city. So that kind of tracks. Go to the next slide here, Tony. That's got the areas where we have those policies in place. But then when you look at the rest of the city, over half of our land area actually has a shrinking population. So on the next slide, you'll see that these are all the census tracts where our population is declining. And when you look at the fact that we have such a large gross population increase, the fact that the majority of our land area is actually accommodating fewer people does not make any sense. That's led to sort of a planning thing that planners are calling the yellow belt, not to be confused with the green belt. And the yellow belt is really something that missing middle housing and what we call missing little housing, things like laneway suites and garden suites, is really trying to readjust for. So the idea is that we want to maintain things like green space, but start to infuse detached housing units into these areas so that they can at least have a stable population while we can continue to accommodate the majority of our growth on the avenues and in the core. So when we speak of the missing little, laneway suites alone can accommodate about, or they are accommodating about 2% of our population growth every year. Garden suites will begin to increase that, which we'll talk about more later. But we're starting to see them have an impact on where people are choosing to live and how they're affecting our growth. So when you think of a laneway suite, always best to think of them as sort of like a basement apartment that's in the back of your lot on top of your garage. They are not severable, which is one of the keys to remember. They will never be sold separately from the main house. The main reason for that is that services for them come from the main house. And finally, the reason we think that they've had such success and we have access to them as of right policy is because they were so sensitively designed by stakeholders. So this is a policy that literally homeowners came out to public meetings and designed this policy with us and with the city. So that's why we've seen such great buy-in and why they've become prevalent in our neighborhoods. So it's important to remember like the features that they bring to a neighborhood and to a site. They're a very gentle form of intensification, relatively speaking. They're making good use of laneways, which we've always had a lot of life on our laneways. Families have always used them for playing and socializing. Well, this helps animate them further and put eyes on them to make them safer. They're really helping us diversify our housing stock in the yellow belt, which is leading to affordability. Now that's not technically capital A affordability, but what laneway suites do help with is people who want to either accommodate a loved one on their site without having to buy them a condo, or rent out a unit, but still have the main house to themselves so they can have a high quality of living. And not to mention like the value it adds to a property, we think has a big impact on a homeowner selecting whether they'll build one or where they're going to buy. So now let's take a look at the bylaws themselves so you can see in more detail what that looks like.
Right. So I'm going to run through just like a very high level overview of the current bylaws. These were first put in place in August of 2018. So they've been sort of not necessarily evolving, that's not the right term, but being applied. And there has been a few sort of small evolutions along the last 3 years now. So just at a high level, the term as of right means that there's no requirement for a committee of adjustment or special planning approvals in order to develop a laneway suite. you would move straight through to building permits, so long as you comply with the bylaws. Laneway suites are exempt from development charges. So typically if you're adding a unit or building a new home or building in the city, there's a levy applied based on the amount of bedrooms or the square footage that you're constructing. For a single bedroom or single bedroom unit, for example, is $26,000. 2-bedroom unit is closer to 50. So I mean, that's a huge incentive for homeowners to the average homeowner, I should say, to take on a project of this nature. There are some affordable housing incentives available through the city. There's tax rebates available through the CRA. Vehicular parking is not required on the lot, so you could have a multiplex in the main house, which traditionally would need a certain amount of parking in order to be legalized. But as soon as you introduce a laneway suite, that parking requirement goes away. And then the laneway suite actually does not count towards your lot density either. Traditionally, every lot in the city has a cap on how much square footage can be built on that property, usually expressed as a percentage of the lot area. The laneway suite is not included in that calculation. So it's free density. So I always say there's sort of 4 key dimensions that dictate what you can build. I would start by saying that your maximum buildable footprint, even like pie in the sky, having a 50-foot lot, a 50-foot wide lot by a 400-foot deep lot, you're always going to be capped at 8 meters wide by 10 meters deep. It equates to about a 1,700 square foot area. That's 850 square feet per floor. So long as your building fits within that and complies with the setbacks and separations that I've noted here, you're going to be within the confines of the zoning envelope. So you are required to provide a 1.5 meter setback from the laneway itself. It's about 5 feet. You're required to provide a minimum of 7.5 meters separation from the rear wall of the main house to the front wall of the laneway suite if it's 2 stories. And a single story laneway suite can come as close as 5 meters to that back wall. So that measurement is measured to the back wall of the house, not to a deck, a porch, veranda, or anything of that nature. And then in terms of the width, so long as you're less than 8 meters, as I mentioned, the width of the building can span lot line to lot line. So you're not required to provide a setback from side lot lines. The only caveat to that is you can't have any openings. So things like windows or doors cannot be placed in 0 lot line conditions. You would have to set back by 1.5 meters if you wanted to insert windows or doors in that case. And the last main dictating piece that you'll find on quite a few laneway suites is this angular plane. It's best sort of described as an imaginary line that's fixed at 7.5 meters from the main house. So imagine a 4 meter high line going upward and then chamfering back at a 45-degree angle. So your building must not project through this imaginary line. So in certain cases on a tight lot, we'll recommend doing a single story unit. You can do basements. So a great way to maximize square footage with a single story unit on a small lot is by digging downward. There's some substantial costs to that, but when you look at the return on investment at that size footprint, it often makes sense. For standard lots, when we're minimizing the separation between the 2 buildings, we'll just rigidly adhere to that zoning envelope and that imaginary line. And then when you have a deeper lot, it's always possible to locate your laneway suite further than that 7.5 meters, which would allow you to clear that imaginary line entirely and you could build straight up, which is why you'll find some of our projects have that angular roof and some of them don't. We just sort of find that sweet spot where it makes sense to maximize volume, maximize outdoor area and indoor area, and function all together. So you can project through the angular plane with a dormer. This is a dormer projecting through that roof line, maximum of 30% of the building width, measured at 4 meters above grade. And in exchange for this free density, whatever's left over, the city really has strict requirements on the landscaping area. So the area between the main house and the laneway suite, if the lot is less than 6 meters frontage, you need to provide 60% soft landscaping. So soft landscaping is sod, mulch, soil, basically any organic ground cover that allows rainwater to permeate. So things like decks, concrete, gravel, that wouldn't comply with soft landscaping requirements. So in most cases, like existing hardscape must be retooled, but it's a small thing to endure in order to leverage the rest of the lot. And then that requirement for the rear yard goes up to 85% for lots that are greater than 6 meters in frontage. And then in all cases, the setback between the laneway house and the laneway itself must be a minimum of 75% soft landscaping, excluding a permitted driveway. So if you wanted to keep a garage within the building, you don't have to, but some people do, in order to maintain parking for resale or whatever else it may be, that would be exempt from that calculation. Then a few other sort of smaller requirements. Well, first of all, the building height is maximum 6 meters or 2 stories. So usually we can get an 8.5 to 9 foot ceiling on the ground floor and then an 8 foot ceiling on the second floor, or vice versa. And you can exceed that building height with mechanical equipment and whatnot, so long as it's no higher than 1 meter above that building height restriction. And it's set in from the roof perimeter a minimum of 1 meter. And you can have a balcony or terrace, whatever you'd like to call it, so long as it doesn't exceed 4 meters above grade, and it has to be within the building footprint facing the laneway. It must not be on the rear yard side. And so whenever you're looking at a lot to qualify for a laneway suite, this is probably the most contentious issue, and emergency access is probably disqualifies about, I want to say about 25% of the properties that come across our desk. So basically, when you don't have a house facing the street, you need to be able to get fire and emergency access to that building somehow. So you have two options in that case. This is an either or. You don't have to provide both. The first is pretty straightforward. It's a maximum of 45 meters measured from the entrance of the laneway suite at the backyard, down the side yard to the front. So this side yard access route must be a minimum of 0.9 meters, about 3 feet. And ideally that's wholly within your property. So measured from your existing building face to the lot line. Now, if it's not, and you have to use a portion of the neighbor's property to get sufficient clearance, then there is an agreement available that you can enter into with your neighbor in order to ensure that that area is reserved for emergency access between neighbors. Then the second option is 45-meter access route via the laneway to a street. Now that 45 meters can be exceeded up to 90 meters, so long as you provide sprinklers or fire alarm. There's a couple options there. So the best case scenario is that you're within 45 meters, but if you can get in within 90 meters, then that's totally possible. Just have to do a little bit more work and incur a little bit more cost in order to make that happen. So sort of applying this, we had, in this case, 44.8 meters measured to the curb, and then 45 meters measured from the curb to the hydrant. So the best way to look at this is you have a pumper truck or fire truck that pulls up to a curb. They don't access the laneway, and they have to extend a hose in one direction to the fire and a hose in the other direction to the hydrant. So I like using this example because if your entranceway was on the north side of the building, we would all of a sudden be over the 45 meters and we would have to put sprinklers or something else in. So it's important to be conscious of these things and being able to design in a way that's going to make this make the most sense. And the second scenario is a side yard setback. In this case, we were 45 meters to the curb in front of the house and then 45 meters to a hydrant. So the process of developing a laneway suite, really the homeowners that we work with really fall into one of these three buckets. We work with quite a few investors, whether they're a career landlord with multiple properties, a first-time investor, or simply a homeowner that lives in the main house that is looking to generate some income on their property. We have quite a few clients that are building for extended family, whether that be in-laws or aging children, or a combination of both. And then the last is increase. I mean, it was a very popular cohort for us, particularly in peak pandemic, where people were looking for that away from home office space that could sort of flex into sort of a hobby space or storage, or just additional space for their kids on the weekends and things like that. So we always sort of advocate for a three-phase process. This is how we structure our services. And before you get there, we always recommend sort of analyze your eligibility, identify opportunities and challenges, and really do as much due diligence as possible. There's quite a few service providers in the market. A lot of them are very qualified. But the unfortunate thing is that we've found many agents sort of work with certain providers that don't have a complete grasp on the bylaws and may have some misleading material in their packages. So we highly recommend checking in with at least two different experienced professionals. Let me put it that way. So for example, with us, we provide free property reports. The property report, all we need is an address or a listing. We turn these around within a couple hours. The report will have a checklist analyzing eligibility, determining a buildable square footage, alongside some example floor plans and projects of a similar nature, and then a complete summary of the process. So,
and Tony, can I just jump in real quick here, because you guys did one of these for Samantha on our team just a few weeks ago. It was her first week on the team, and she was showing a house that her client had hoped to build a Laneway house in. Now, unfortunately, he didn't buy the property, but that report that you provided her within, like you said, a couple of hours, it was beautifully presented. It had all of the options. It was just really, really, really helpful. So I thank you for that. It was really a great piece.
Very happy to hear.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize these are free. So like, if you have a listing and you want to send this to buyers, like, we will prepare for you for free. If you have a client who's looking to purchase a property and they've got 5 properties they're looking at, just send us a list of properties and we'll send you one of these for each property you're looking at. Like, this is free information, and we really want to protect consumers with this. So never be afraid to leverage it, and then even use it in your own sales material.
Thank you.
And then really we jump into preliminary design. So this is our first step of the design process, sort of working through a basic site plan, identifying sort of key items like protected trees, minimum setbacks, access, privacy, parking, things of that nature, and basically applying the bylaws to the property itself. And we put together sort of basic floor plans that are dimensioned, highly resolved, but not quite engineered. I sort of akin these to a condo sales plan, making sure that okay, great, we have the exterior envelope, but let's make sure that we're working from the inside out as well, to make sure that we're building to accommodate our programmatic goals. We do a cost analysis. So we're not only architects, but we're developers and builders. So we like to connect the dots physically and financially. So looking at different options for bedroom counts versus parking, and different considerations with costing, but also the revenue potential, both in terms of sort of monthly or annual cash flow, but also in terms of stabilized value using a standard cap rate. And then really time is money as well. So looking at the timeline and being realistic about sort of the phases of deliverables and how we evolve this from sort of day one to keys in hand. And the second phase.
Sorry, Tony, I just also want to point out, we do provide everything Tony just listed in phase 1 as a design package that is not free, but it can be really good if you're selling a property. So the property reports are free and unlimited. The phase 1 would be something that it's if you have a listing with really good laneway potential, to spend the money on doing customized floor plans and having budgets and schedules to leave out at your open houses or to send to buyers. That's far more dense and something that we think really is worth its weight in gold when it comes to listing a property.
Mhm.
Is there a standard price for that, or does it vary with the property?
That's a standard price. We bill it's $1,850 plus HST. We turn that around within a week or to a week and a half if we have a survey available.
Thank you.
And it usually includes a couple different options. So like we'll talk about later, a different user is going to want to see different things in a Laneway suite. So normally we do an option that's geared for revenue and an option that's geared for grandma. So you can see kind of what the difference looks like from a design perspective.
Right.
Mhm.
And then once we've sort of decided on a general direction, we're on the same page with costing, and sort of have like more or less locked in those floor plans and building footprint. That's when we really dive into resolving the design, and we start by putting together multiple options for the building envelope, how this can be cladded, how the geometry can work, how apertures and overhangs can be treated in different ways. Then we'll put together some eye-level perspectives. We work in 3D. We have a 3D modeling software that's incredibly powerful that allows us to literally walk the average homeowner through every aspect of the design process. And then we resolve everything. I mean, we structure our services in a way where we include all of the structural and mechanical engineering. We are sort of your one-stop shop. And I always tell the homeowners that we work with, you have 3 responsibilities. The first is review and provide feedback on the design. Number 2 is provide a signature on the application. Then number 3 is pay your invoice. Besides that, everything is in our hands, and it's a very seamless process that does not take very long.
You said those in reverse order, by the way.
And so, yeah, I mean, we take pride in what we do with our drawings as well. I mean, another thing I commonly say is the reason why we're able to have so many projects underway at a time is because we put the time and effort into resolving the building in digital space before physical space. So everything is coordinated. And again, sort of working through this not only aesthetically, but also functionally, and sort of working through interior palettes and things of that nature. And then ultimately resolving our drawings for permit, tender, and construction, working through details and interior elevations and details as well. So it's a little bit unique to have such a comprehensive package from one provider, especially in a custom residential space. But we find that working with the average homeowner is a huge value add. I would say 95% of our clients have not done so much as renovate a bathroom, never mind build a brand new house. So it's a very pleasurable process when you're able to really focus on the things that matter, and you have sort of one point of contact that sort of evolves everything from day 1 to day 300.
I don't think that we can underestimate that, because when you do have that one point of contact and somebody that coordinates everything for you, you don't have to jump around between people trying to figure it out yourself. So I think that's really, really important too.
100%. Everybody's busy. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, if you don't want something looming over your head, and I mean, what it is like we rely on a very templated process. The way that I best explain it is, I mean, where a lot of people ask, I mean, do you do prefab Laneway homes? We don't do prefab in terms of construction, but our process is prefab. So everything behind the curtain, I mean, you've heard the term, there's an app for that. There's a form for that. There's a template for that, right? There's like everything that we do is completely custom, but everything is a kit of parts, which allows that process to move so seamlessly, but also for the homeowner to be engaged and in control. So we'll dive into construction. So as Craig had mentioned in the beginning, service connections are all made to the main house. So your 4 key pieces here are your hydro, your gas, your domestic water supply, and your sanitary line. So sanitary being your wastewater. You can put a separate hydrometer on the main house and have the laneway suite on its own account. But with gas and water, it is all on a single meter from the provider. You can put a check meter on, of course, if you'd like. We will often have to upgrade the electrical service from 100 amps to 200 amps. Gas is usually sufficient, and in some cases we have to increase the water supply from the street from a 1/2-inch line to at least a 3/4, but that really just depends on the demand in the main house and the age of the line. So really when we're making these connections, it's a matter of looking at, I mean, it's one of those things where there's 10 different ways to approach the same thing, but there's always one very clear best way. So things like access, location of the existing services, the condition of the basement, and the nature of the lines being connected. I mean, for example, do you need gas or not, right? So those different factors all come into play in determining how best to make these connections. Our structure, I mean, we use standard stick frame construction. We have looked into various different methods of prefab or modular construction, and have always found that a sort of 2x6 and TGIs are going to be the most cost effective, the most versatile, and quite frankly, the easiest to build in the tight confines of a laneway. So we are constantly evolving our details and our methods, but what we're able to do with these standards is sort of competitively tender to a wide array of different contractors. Some of the homeowners that we work with have builders that they like to work with as well, so this allows us to be flexible. Construction drawings are like sheet music. There's an inherent understanding of standards. So the less you diverge from the standard, the more cost effective and the more successful you're going to be. And likewise with the building envelope. I mean, we try to, well, we do employ sort of going above and beyond code minimums. We use things like exterior insulations, sheathing tapes, smart barriers, and just sort of, we believe in strategic investments in the key aspects of the build. So you're creating a super airtight, thermally efficient envelope. I mean, just yesterday I was walking through one of our builds that has a concrete floor on a concrete slab on the ground floor, and I was in the garage and it was cold, and I said, "Man, can you turn down the AC?" And he's like, "The AC is not on." It's like that. This thing is so airtight. So a lot of times it's a mere formality in putting in HVAC systems. So not at in that same vein, HVAC systems, I mean, really, the laneway suite is heated and cooled on its own. So we're running those raw services to the laneway suite, but you still have an air handler, a furnace, or a heat pump that's heating and cooling air at that location. So really what it comes down to when you're selecting the system is sort of, I mean, how big is the unit? I mean, what's kind of the control and comfort level that's required? What's your energy source? And really, this is another one of those things where there's multiple different ways to approach the same thing, but there's always one best way. And then finishing, really, at every point in the process, there's sort of 3 key things that come into your decision making: cost, maintenance, and durability. And then between the different use cases, whether it be rental or for grandma or for yourself, you always want to sort of weigh those considerations differently. And let's not throw out the idea of the aesthetic direction. I mean, quite a few of our builds are modern, but we do quite a bit of classic as well. And again, sort of, what about the strategic investments? Going a little bit further with a nice countertop, but dressing up some IKEA cabinetry, or looking at alternative ways of achieving sort of hardwood floors or whatever else it may be. So these are a few of our interiors. All of these are rentals except for this one, which was a very, very basic budget build for a homeowner's daughter. So we'll dive into 2 quick case studies. So the first is our Seton Village laneway suite. not sure if you've seen this by now. This was finished about a year ago now. This is a 1,050 square foot unit built for mom and dad's daughter. The homeowners lived in the main house, had a very, very tight budget. Project almost didn't happen, but what we did was sort of determine a realistic budget upfront and work toward that at every stage in the process. So the ground floor, we had a single car garage for mom and dad, a home office that could become flex space now and in future. Then the second floor was a compact 1-bedroom, very uniquely tailored to exactly what the homeowner's daughter wanted and required. So here, total construction budget, or the total development budget, arrived at about 380K. Just being frank, that's not possible in today's market. Most of our developments are coming in around the 450 to 500K mark. But I mean, there's always room to work toward budget. And then we always sort of put together a return analysis, regardless of the use case. So we approximate this, it's a 1+1, right in the heart of Seton Village. It's walking distance to a subway. So we projected a $2,800 a month rental rate, minus operating expenses, cost of borrowing, and factoring in principal paid. We're looking at about 14 grand cash flow annually. And then when you apply a very conservative 5% cap, you're looking at a total stabilized value of 540K, minus your project cost at 390, gives you a net equity gain day one of about 150 grand. And then this is on the opposite end of the city. This is at Danforth and Dawes. We worked with the homeowner here. He was on the hunt for Laneway eligible property. So we actually went through an analysis of probably 5 or 6 other lots before we landed on this one. I had this come across my desk one day and I shot it over to him and was like, Harry, this one's a gem. Like, let's take a look at it. And so what we did was we worked with the homeowner to convert the main house into a 5-plex, and then we built this awesome family-oriented rental at the rear. So this is about 1,450 square feet, I want to say, dedicated dining, kitchen, living. And then you get 3 large bedrooms, a full principal suite with a common bath. So we could have gotten 4 bedrooms in this, but each bedroom would have been 9 to 9.5 feet. And we felt as though when we did the analysis, we felt as though a 3-bedroom unit with some elbow room made a lot more sense in the long term. Not only in terms of quality of space and quality of living, but also in terms of revenue. It was the intent was not to have a high turnover rooming house. It was about building something that was good, have a stable long-term tenant. So this project all in came out to about 550K. This is grossing about $4,000 a month, creating 4,000 minus your operating expenses about 40K a year, and then annual profit at about 21K. And then again, assessed at a modest 5% cap rate, we're at 786,000 minus your project costs. We gained 234,000 day one. And this was actually when he went back and refinanced based on this, and he accessed another 80% of that reappraisal. So proof's in the pudding.
Yeah, suffice it to say, anyone who owns a house on a laneway right now, like, we've never made a pro forma that wasn't cash flow positive and equity positive from day one. So they're great investments, especially if you already own the land. If you're going out looking for the land, I mean, that's a slightly different case based on what you can buy it for, but they're great.
Yep.
You get to build a second house without going to committee of adjustment and without paying development charges. They're fantastic.
Yeah, so all it is, I mean, just the final slide here is these are some really key questions that we recommend everybody ask themselves, whether they're building it for themselves or as a rental or for family. And I'll just sort of run through a couple of our projects that we've completed. This is Seton Village. This is that Danforth Village. This is one we recently finished in Cabbagetown. Dovercourt Park, we finished this one last year. Corso Italia. This is in Leslieville. Craig, I think you finished this one in 2016.
14, I think.
14. Wow, you're getting old.
That was done before the bylaws were in place.
Right. And then this is one of our first in Cedarville. And that's it. I mean, I think there's only 3 people here, but I mean, you're more than welcome to ask any questions. And I believe this is being recorded as well. So
the key takeaways to leave with, I think, are that the value proposition of a Laneway suite is very powerful. So if you have a listing, being able to communicate that value is something that is going to help you get an even higher sales price for your property. And it doesn't take much to have the documentation to have a really clear picture of what that Laneway suite can look like. So that's something for your listings to remember, and also for your clients who are looking to purchase. Our free property assessments are hopefully going to be a very valuable tool for you that is either going to help you verify another consultant's report or possibly just shine a light where there's currently shadow. So hopefully our services there are something that you can put to good use to really benefit your clients and at the end of the day, help you get higher sale prices.
any questions? So I think Jaspreet.
Doesn't look like.
Okay.
Okay, so just a quick question, a little bit more on the sustainability aspect of it. Have you guys built something or designed something potentially where it's a little bit more off the grid? You're not reliant so much on the services from the main house. Has that been questioned or brought up or anything like that? Just out of curiosity.
Definitely. So getting a Laneway suite to being off grid is very challenging.
Right.
The main reason being their roof area is limited relative to their volume. So getting a PV array that can provide all the electricity for the house is difficult unless you have really optimal orientation. But
maybe not completely
possible.
off the grid, but like maybe a little bit less reliant than a lot of services coming out of the main house.
Definitely. To be honest, getting like 80% there is where you see the most bang for your buck and have the biggest impact on like our environment. So that's really easy to achieve with any building, including a Laneway suite. And yeah, we've done it and it's fun. Like it's possible to have Laneway suites certified by like the Lead for Homes program. Like
Right.
if you have a client who is really interested in that and they want like a plaque on the wall at the end of that, those kinds of programs would be really enticing to renters or to potential purchasers.
Okay, that's good to know. Also, thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Well,
Thanks so much for having us, everyone. I mean, feel free to follow up with us if you have more questions. It's Tony@landscape.ca or Craig@landscape.ca. And if you want any of our property assessments, just send the address or addresses to info@landscape.ca and we'll turn those around for you. And also, I mean, if you want to help us with our advocacy work, including like get information on garden suites and other types of secondary housing that's going to be coming around, follow us on social media. We keep everyone updated there.
Thanks so much
Thanks,
for your time.
everyone.
Take care.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye-bye.